I don't know if you know what Scottish fairies look like. They're not little inkly twinkly people with inkly twinkly wings. They're about as high as a grown man's thigh. And they live in different places. Sometimes they live at the top of the high hills to look after the water and where the streams begin. Sometimes they live in the deep woods to look after the high trees. But mostly they live in fairy mounds. And these particular fairies I'm going to tell you about lived in a fairy mound at the top of a glen way up in the west of Scotland. Down near the foot of that glen was a nice little house. But Scottish fairies, you must know this, every one of them has a special pocket. And in that special pocket they keep a special spoon to eat their favourite food with. Because what they like to be paid in? They like to be paid in cream. In the long days of long ago, there was a woman who lived in that little hut, that little house down at the foot of the glen. And do you know how many children she had? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. One day she said, this place is such a mess because, you see, they only lived in one room. The animals lived in the other room. And 7 children and her in one room. Was that a bit of a mess? That was more than a bit of a mess. She chased them out and said, I'm going to tidy this place up. But when she picked up something, there was something else underneath it. When she picked that thing up, it was stuck to the carpet. When she piled some things in the corner, they fell over and they somehow crept back into the middle of the room. And she got so fed up indeed. She said something she should never have said aloud, because you never know who is listening. She said, I wish the fairies would come and help me tidy this house. She didn't mean it. But there must have been a fairy passing by who heard her, because they took the message back to the fairy hill, and the fairies came out of the fairy hill and they ran down the glen and they were cheering, running down, because they were going to get into the house and they were going to get fed what they loved most in the world. And they chanted, cream, 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 cream. But she said, no. Before you get paid in cream, you are going to have to do some cleaning. And they began to do some cleaning. They began to clean the chair. They polished the chair. They swept the chair. They dusted the chair. It looked pretty good. And then they said again, cream, 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 cream. And she went to the other room of the house where the cow was, and she got the great big wooden dish that was full of cream, and she carried the dish back through to her own room, and she put it down on the table, and all the fairies put their hands into their spoon pockets and took out their spoons and gathered around the big dish and went, and then they said, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream. And she said, well, I'll give you more cream, but you're going to have to do more tidying and more cleaning first. And they began to clean the carpet. They cleaned the carpet and it was really lovely and clean. They cleaned the table and they made the table shine. It was so nice. They cleaned the grate of the fire until it was beautiful and black. And then they wanted to get paid and they said, more cream, 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 more cream. And she said, well, I'll need to get you some more cream. Yes, indeed. And she went next door to her neighbour and she got more cream and she brought it back to them and she gave it to them, and they all put their hands into their spoon pockets and they took out their spoons and they gathered around the cream and they went, and they said again, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream, more cream. And she said, well, I'll go and get you some more cream then, all right then. And the fairy lady said, well, we better make her something nice. She's being nice to us. We'll make her a big, tasty, crispy bannock. Now a bannock is a thing halfway between a big biscuit and a small loaf of bread, and halfway between a very flat thing and a very round thing. They went to the barrel where the oatmeal was and they took lots of oatmeal. They went to the jug where the sweet water was and they mixed the oatmeal with the water, and they went to where the salt was kept in the little thing that's called a pig. It doesn't look like a pig, but it keeps the salt dry. And they took out some salt and they mixed it all together, and then they rolled it out till it was very wide and very flat and very round, and they put it on the big stone that was kept warm because it sat beside the fire. And the fire kept the stone hot, and then the stone would bake the bannock as it sat on it. And while they were doing that, she had gone to the neighbour, and she said to the neighbour, "Can I borrow some more cream, please?" And the neighbour said, "I'm sorry, you got all the cream I had. I haven't any more left." "Oh," she said, "I need to get more cream because I've got the fairies in the house and they want to get paid with cream." "Oh, no," said the neighbour. "How on earth did they get in?" "Well," said the woman, "I kind of invited them in by mistake." "Oh, my word," said the neighbour, "you'll never get rid of them. Do you know what they'll do if you don't give them more cream? They will pull your children's hair out, one hair at a time. Bing! Bang! Bang! You don't want to have bald children, do you?" She said, "Oh, I wouldn't like to have bald children. 7 children is enough. 7 bald children would be far too much. What can I do?" "Well, I'll tell you what you can do," said the neighbour, and she whispered away that she could surprise the fairies and get rid of them. So she tiptoed back to her own house, and when she was sure they were going to be really surprised, she shouted out very clearly, "Fairies, fairies, your hell is on fire!" When the fairies heard that, they ran out of the house, and they ran away up the hill, away out of the house, to go and put the fire out on their fairy hill. But when they found out it wasn't true at all, they got very angry, and they began to run down the glen again, heading for her house and to get in and get some more cream. And they came to the door, but she had barred the door. She had shut it. She had put a big wooden bolt across it so it couldn't get opened. And they said through the door, "Woman of the house, let us in, let us in. More cream, more cream." And she said, "I'm sorry, you can't come in. No, go away, no more cream, none left." And they said, "Let us in, let us in." But she wouldn't let them in, and they said, "Wait a minute, how could we? Oh, we cleaned the chair. The chair is our friend now." And they said through the door, "Chair, chair, let us in, let us in." And the chair began to hump and bump and lump and jump to go to the door and to let them in. But the woman saw the chair, and she grabbed the chair and she knocked it over, and she scrunched it up, and she took ash from the fire and she rubbed it all over it so it's all dirty. The fairies didn't see, and they said again through the door, "Chair, chair, let us in, let us in." And the chair said, "I can't come and get you. Open the door because she knocked me down and rubbed ash on my face. Can't be your friend anymore. Can't let you in." The fairy said, "Who else did we clean?" "The table." And they said through the door, "Table, table, let us in, let us in." And the table began to and really bump and go to the door and let them in. But the woman saw it. She grabbed that table and she knocked it down on its side, and she went and got more ash from the fire and rubbed it all over the table's top. The fairies didn't see. They said through the door again, "Table, table, let us in, let us in." And the table said, "I can't because she's knocked me down and rubbed ash all over me and I'm little dirty. Can't come to the door and can't let you in." The fairy said, "Who else, who else, who else?" "Oh, we cleaned the carpet." And they said through the door, "Carpet, carpet, let us in, let us in." And the carpet rolled itself up into a roll and stood up on its one foot and began to hop, 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 to go to the door and to let them in. But of course, what happened? The woman saw it and she grabbed the carpet and knocked it over and she scrunched it up and rubbed ash all over it and it was all dirty again. The fairies didn't see. They said through the door, "Carpet, carpet, let us in, let us in." And the carpet said, "I can't let you in. I'm all scrunched and bunched and munched and bunched and ash all over me and I can't be your friend anymore and I can't let you in." And the fairy women said, "We know who will let us in. The bannock, the big round bannock that we were cooking will get us in." And they said through the door, "Bannock, bannock, let us in, let us in." And the big round bannock stood up on the stone where it was cooking and began to roll towards the door to open it and let the fairies in. And the woman saw that and she jumped on the bannock and broke it into bits. But all the little bits went skitty, skitty, scatty, 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 scatty. They were going to climb up on top of each other and open the door and let her in. She stamped, she stamped, she stamped and stamped until there was nothing left but crumbs. The fairies didn't see. They said through the door again, "Bannock, bannock, let us in, let us in." And all the little crumbs said, "Ow, can't, ow, oh, 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 ow, oh, 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 bunch, crash, bunch, plug, oh, sorry, oh, can't be your friend anymore and can't let you in." And the fairies knew that nobody was going to let them into the house. And they said to the door, "Woman of the house, we're going home now, but don't you ever, and we mean never, ask us to come and clean your house again." And they went home. Please do yourself and the poor fisherman out at sea a favour. Every time you eat a boiled egg, once you have eaten it, turn the shell upside down and break it through so that it is useless. Because if you don't do that, then a witch can take that fresh eggshell and use it to sail out to sea and cause a storm, and that storm might kill poor fishermen, poor seamen. Do yourself a favour and do them a favour and break that eggshell. Imagine a storm out at sea. This is a story about fishermen who were caught by such a storm, a wind that came upon them from the southeast and would not let them go home for week after week. This story comes from way up in the place called Cromarty on the Black Isle, which isn't black, nor is it an island, a strange place. Those fishermen came from the port of Cromarty and they sailed just 5 or 6 miles north to the place called Shandwick. If they'd walked by road, it would have taken them 40 miles. But they were going in their boat. They sailed over there and they had a little hut and they stayed there and they went out fishing just off of the shore and they were catching fish, bringing them back, putting them into the barrels, adding the salt, more fish, another barrel, more salt, and they caught and they caught and they harvested and they harvested. But after a while, the weather was getting worse and they began to think of home. They began to think of their wives. They began to think of how they would rest during the winter time, put their feet up, mend some nets, and enjoy life. They were tired of just going out catching fish and bringing them back to the shore. They wanted to sail away homeward. They could go for a dance when they were back at home. They could just enjoy talking with their friends in the pub. It was time to go. It was time to set off for home. But when they went and tried to set off for home and got into their boat and loaded it up and pushed off from the shore, the wind came howling from the southeast and would not let them go home. They tried to push off, but every time they were pulled back and pushed back right to the shore. They tried again. Out they went. Back they came. And again they tried. Out they went. And back they came. Again and again and again. They could not. They could not. At last they despaired of ever getting home. And then the skipper said, well, we must go and get a wind. We need to get a wind, and I'll tell you where we'll get one. We'll buy one from the witch who lives up the hill, little Steenie Big of Shandwick. She'll sell us a wind. We know, normally it's hard to buy a wind, but we've got something. I know she would like to get a bottle of Cromarty whiskey. So they went up the hill, and they saw her little house, and they stood before the door wondering who would be brave enough to open that door, and none of them would reach out their hand to open the door. But while they were thinking about this, suddenly the door opened all by itself. And they looked inside. When they looked inside, was there a little old lady? No, they couldn't see a little old lady, but they did see that up on the rafter was sitting a big black bird, a raven. And they thought, maybe that's her. And they said, hello, excuse us, is that you, a little Steenie? We'd like to talk to you, please. And the raven looked round with one cold eye and then looked away again, and it was not her. They looked in again. Oh, there was a cat sitting beside a trough of bubbling live water. The fish were jumping in and out of the water, and the cat was watching them with such delight. And he said, is that her? Excuse us, is that you? Little Steenie, is that you? And the cat never even acknowledged them. She just kept looking into the trough of fish. And he thought, that's not her. And they had to shout out, hello, hello, little Steenie, are you there? And they heard a voice speaking back to them, said, go away. He said, well, no, excuse us, little Steenie, we need to talk to you. And the voice said again, go away. And he said, no, please, we need to talk to you. We've brought a bottle of whiskey with us When little Steenie heard that they had a bottle of whiskey with them, her voice changed. She said, "Oh, you better come in then. What can I do for you?" "Oh, Cromarty whiskey. Excellent. Yes, that'll do nicely. You want me to sell you a wind, do you?" "Certainly. I'll be only too delighted." "Did you bring your water jug with you?" They had brought their water jug with them. "Excellent," she said. She went to the door. Beside the door was the broom that she had for all kinds of purposes, not just for cleaning the floor. And she broke off 1 straw, 2 straws, 3 straws. And she put the 3 straws across the top of the water jug. And she said, "There is your wind. Carry it to your boat. When you are ready to sail, take off 1 straw. If you are ready to go very fast, take off 2 straws. But whatever you do, for anything's sake, never take off the 3rd straw." They loaded up the boat. They got all the barrels of fish and beautiful salt herring, and they piled them high in the boat. And when they were all ready and all in the boat, then they very carefully, very exactly, took off the 1st straw. And they began to sail out. The wind had changed on their side, and the wind was pushing them all out to sea. They were sailing so well, so fine, so beautifully all across the sea. It was so fine to be out in the open sea. And look, they could see the North Sutter, the hill that guarded the Cromarty Firth. Yes, they were going to go towards there, and they were going to head for home, and on they went. And yes, they could see further. They could see the South Sutter down below, which would be their own town of Cromarty, and they would get there, but they wanted to go faster. This was too slow. They said, "Oh, this is too slow. Let's take off the 2nd straw." And they took off the 2nd straw. When they took off that 2nd straw, the wind began to howl, and the waves began to lash, and they flew over the tops of the waves, heading for home, heading safely for home. And they were almost there. They could see their own street. They could see their own houses. They could see their wives washing, flying in the wind. And they were looking forward to some nice, clean clothing. And then the skipper said something that he shouldn't have said, and did something he should never have done. He said, "Let's see what happens if we take off the 3rd straw." When they took off that 3rd straw, the wind didn't get higher. In fact, the wind calmed down and became very deliberate. Do you know what it did? It just turned itself right round in the opposite direction and blew from the southeast again, and very deliberately just pushed them back away from home, across the Firth, underneath the North Sutter, all the way back up, all the way back towards Shandwick, all the way back towards that sandy bay, and it just pushed them right up the sandy bay and up until they were higher than the highest tide of winter, and they would never get their boat off again. And what were they going to do to get home? They would have to walk the 45 miles home, leaving their barrels of fish behind to become rotten and stink. And they walked down through Inverbree, and they walked down through Alness and through Dingwall and Kilbokey and back out to Cromarty. And they hoped they would get their boat off in the middle of winter, but one thing they knew, and they knew for sure, whatever they did, they could not ask little Steenie for any more help ever again. King Midas was a king who lived in the land of Greece long ago in a golden palace. King Midas was a reasonable sort of a king and got on pretty well with his people, but he had a fondness for gold. He loved gold. It ran in his family. He did a favour for a god called Bacchus, and the god gave him a present that anything he touched would turn to gold. Wow, what a present. He tried it out. He touched a piece of wood and it turned into a piece of gold. Wow. He touched a piece of metal and it was gold instead of ordinary metal. Even better. But wait a minute. He thought, I'm hungry, and he picked up an apple to eat it, and what happened to the apple? It turned into a lump of gold. He said, I'm thirsty, and he picked up a jug to pour wine, and the jug turned into a golden jug, and the wine froze into gold in the middle of the air. And he thought, I have a problem. I won't be able to eat. I won't be able to drink. What can I do? And as he was wondering and puzzling what he was going to do, his little daughter came running in, and she saw him and she saw her father feeling so unhappy, and she jumped up to comfort him with a cuddle, but whenever she touched him, he tried to push her back. It was too late. He touched her and she turned into a golden statue, and he had lost his little daughter. What could he do? All he could do was pray to Bacchus, Bacchus, please take away this wonderful gift, which has turned into a terrible gift. And Bacchus took the gift away, and his little daughter turned back into a little girl of flesh and blood. What a relief. But he had done such a foolish thing through his greed, and he felt very bad about it, and he went away into the forest to hide. When he was in there in the forest, he heard remarkable sounds of music. Somewhere deep in the forest, two musicians were playing and were having a competition, and he went tiptoe, tiptoe here and there. It was the sounds of strings playing and the sounds of pipes playing, and those sounds were so beautiful. He went to see who the musicians were. He crept. He knew that they were no ordinary musicians. He could tell they might even be gods by the wonderful way they played. He crept to the edge of the clearing, and true enough, he saw one of them was as bright and shining as the sun, the god Apollo playing his stringed instrument called the lyre. And the other one was half a person, and the bottom half was a goat. It was the god Pan of the woods, who was the brightest green that you ever saw in your life. And one played, and the other played, and one played, and the other played, and they played so magnificently he could not hold back. He shouldn't have said anything, but he shouted out, "Well done, both of you!" Whenever the gods heard him, they said, "Who is that? Come out." And he went walking out quite carefully, and he was a king, but when gods call you, then you have to be cautious. And were they angry? They were furious. They said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm King Midas." They said, "Oh, King Midas, we heard about you and what happened to you with the golden touch. You were in trouble there, weren't you? You're in worse trouble now. You have heard us playing, and no mortal is supposed to hear the gods when they play music. Your ears are too big. But they're not quite big enough to show just what a fellow you are." And they made his ears shoot up until they were so high they could dance by themselves, and King Midas had donkey's ears. And of course, he was so embarrassed. If he was worried about how he had behaved before, now that he had donkey's ears instead of ordinary person's ears, he knew everyone would laugh and point and point. What could he do? He stayed in the forest till his hair was so long he could wrap it up and wrap his ears away inside there, and no one could see that he really had donkey's ears at all. And then he went home to his palace. And he was pleased to see them. They were pleased to see him. They were happy to have a king, and he was happy to have people to rule. But of course, all the time his hair got more and more long and more tangled and more unsightly. And he couldn't bear to have it cut to show the donkey's ears, but it became totally unmanageable, and everybody said, "Look at King Midas, he's got very nasty habits, hasn't he?" And he thought, "I'll have to do something." So he sent for a barber to cut his hair. When the barber untied the great mass of hair and cut here and cut there, what happened but the ears popped up and danced around at the top of King Midas's head. And the barber said, "Wow, where did you get those from, Your Majesty?" And he told the story, and the barber said, "Well, I see this professional problem. I think what you require is an elongated form of pigtail that will tie your ears up in, and they'll look very neat, and they'll look very nice." And they did. And he looked very respectable again. But the barber had a secret. I don't know if you ever had a secret that burst to get out and you couldn't keep it in. What could he do? But he couldn't tell, because he had promised the king that he would not tell a living soul before he could even be allowed to cut that hair. So he went into the forest, and he dug a hole in the ground, in the soft ground of the forest, and he whispered into the hole, "King Midas has donkey's ears." And then he made the ground all neat all over the hole again and went away. But the reeds grew up from out of that hole, and they whispered together, and they whispered, "King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears." And the reeds grew up, and they sang, and the leaves of a tree nearby heard them, and they joined in, and they sang also, but so quietly that unless you could speak leaf language, you wouldn't know what was being said. And they said as well, "King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears." And then along came a man into the woods, and he had an axe, and he had a saw, and he cut that tree down. And he cut one end of the tree and another end of the tree till he had a nice big lump of wood that he carried back to where he lived, and he cut it into slices, and he left those slices of wood for a whole year till they would grow dry and sweet and manageable and workable. And then he took various tools, and he cut one slice and another slice and small pieces, and he fitted them together, and he made a violin. And then he cut another piece and carved it to make the neck, and carved pieces for the pegs. And then he got 4 strings, and he took the strings and he put them on the violin, and he took his very best bow to try his new violin out, and he tested his violin. And then a knock came at the door. And he answered the door, and it was an invitation to come to the palace for a party. King Midas had invited everybody he could think of, and of course all the musicians in the kingdom, to come to play for a wonderful party. And off they all went. And the musicians were playing away when in came the man with his beautiful new fiddle in a bag. And they all stopped because they wanted to hear. They knew it'd be something interesting. And he opened the bag and out came the beautiful new violin. And he said, play it, see what it sounds like. And he took up the fiddle and he took up the bow and he struck on the strings. But when it was struck, it sang loud and clear and louder again. King Midas' donkey's ears, King Midas' donkey's ears, King Midas' donkey's ears, King Midas' donkey's ears. The ears jumped out and they danced along with the song. The musicians all joined in with the King Midas' donkey's ears song. Everybody began to laugh. And they began to calm down because you can't laugh for all of your life. And when they thought about it, they thought, well, he's still a reasonable sort of king, and he was quite used to having them as people. They said, well, let's get on together with each other. And they did a pretty good job of it after that. But whenever the people from the kingdoms all around talked about King Midas's kingdom, what they always remarked was, does King Midas still have donkey's ears? The musicians liked to tell that story so much, they made up a way to tell the story in music only.